Welcome to Prospecting Purpose, where we explore mining's role in shaping a sustainable, socially just, and brighter future. I'm Liz Friel, your host for the series, with a rotating guest on every episode. Have you noticed how industry discourse on Indigenous rights, self-determination, cultural heritage has been expanding? Have you found yourself confused by acronyms like FPIC or UNDRIP, wondering what they mean for the industry? Maybe you've wondered about the future of Indigenous participation in mineral resource development. That's exactly what we're going to focus on today. Joining me as my co-host for this episode is Alan Adzirza, a Tahltan Nation elder, recognized artist, and senior negotiator. Alan is specialized in bringing together First Nations, public governments, communities, and industry, and has held numerous advisory positions with governments across the country. Alan actually has over 50 years of mineral exploration and development experience. He started as a laborer in the pit and the mill, and today is founder of his own company. Welcome, Alan. It's so great to have you on the show.
Thank you.
Alan, you're an elder from a First Nation here in Canada who also has a foot in the mining industry. From your perspective and experience, how can mineral extraction and Indigenous values coexist healthily?
I'd like to start by saying that many Indigenous leaders recognize mining as an important resource economy for them to achieve self-determination. You know, I'm Tahltan, and in our country, our people used to trade obsidian for thousands of years. I view that as mining. My first involvement in the mining sector was really in Faro Mine. As a young newlywed guy, that's where I went to seek employment, and it was probably one of the best decisions. In the 70s, when I worked at Faro, was at a time when mining companies really did not engage with the local First Nations. The Faro Mine, even though it was like 50 miles away from Ross River suffered many impacts from the mine itself.
Right, and even today, we still see heartbreaking, frustrating incidents harming progress on themes of community respect, trust, relationships. The most high-profile one in 2020 is probably the Juukan Gorge tragedy, the 46,000-year-old rock shelters that were destroyed. They had immense Aboriginal heritage significance in the Pilbara in Australia. These kinds of incidents happen less and less, and I wonder if in your career you feel like trends overall are suggesting that we are moving in a better direction. Do you feel encouraged?
Well, I'd have to say that some of the larger companies, they recognize that they should be working to build a relationship with those people whose lands they're on. And so they've started doing what we call impact benefit agreements or project agreements of some sort, but it's still sort of disjointed. You know, I think that as we look at the UN Declaration for the Rights of Indigenous People, what it does is it sets out some principles. It's really known as basically as a human rights piece of work.
Right. So the United Nations Declaration on Rights of Indigenous People was adopted in 2007. It wasn't until 2016 that here in Canada we signed up. And I'd love to hear your perspective on how that's changed things as we see the rise of the term free, prior, and informed consent within the industry.
So I'm going to give you an example. If you take a look at the Mineral Tenure Act in British Columbia, you as an individual can go online, buy a free miner certificate from anywhere in the world. So they're giving a legal interest to our land and to our resource without any input at all, or without even having to talk to the affected First Nations. And I say that's wrong. And that's kind of what the UN Declaration is getting at. Is you shouldn't be able to do that.
Absolutely. I wanted to go back to, you mentioned earlier, Indigenous people were mining on this continent well before the arrival of European settlers. And there's still this strong relationship between the mining sector and Indigenous peoples. Like, I've heard that mining is proportionately the largest private sector employer of Indigenous peoples. But one thing I think we don't see a lot still is Indigenous owned or Indigenous managed mineral resource development. Is that something that you think that we should be aspiring to?
I absolutely think it's essential. I want to tell you a little story. One of the major examples that I can demonstrate to you in the Yukon, there was a Ross River Dena Council elder by the name of Joe Ledoux. You see, and Joe Ledoux actually took Al Kulan up onto the original Faro mine site, showed him the water that was coming out of there. It was real rusty red. And it was Al Kulan then who had it drilled out and developed, and he became a multimillionaire over it. Joe Ledoux was given 500 a month for as long as he lived.
Mhm.
And so what's happened with that kind of a scenario, you see, is the wealth is typically leaves the community. Up to now, it's been largely what we would call trinkets and beads kind of mentality as to how they would deal with Indigenous people. You see, so I believe it's important for us, our people, to start getting geology degrees, mining engineer degrees. We need to start to sit on the board of directors. We need to set up our own companies, and we need to start to become owners. As you build a wealth, you then have the ability to deal with helping your community to rise as a collective community.
That makes me think about economic reconciliation. Reconciliation's been a buzzword in Canada, especially over the last 5 years. What can mining's role be in advancing economic reconciliation, in particular, in this country, but also all over the world?
What we're talking about is we have to build these relationships that are getting built on, respect for each other and trust. The development of our lands and resources are really key for a lot of our communities on how do you achieve that economic self-sufficiency
Right.
so that you're not relying on government.
Well, and I guess this is where the equity conversation comes in. With equity, you can have so much more say over the business model, over the mine plan, over the entire life cycle planning. I wanted to ask you. You're a 51% owner of a company called Chiona Metals, right?
That's correct.
So that's an exploration partnership with a pretty unique business model for junior exploration. Could you tell us a bit about what's unique with that compared to other junior explorers?
Shona, in our language, it means wolf, from the Wolf Clan. And what's really interesting is my partner is Deerhorn Capital, and I hold 51%, and I do have the voting authority as to the direction of the company. It's one that I'm very proud of. You see, I take the view that if I'm going to go and do exploration, that I should talk to the First Nation whose lands I'm going to be on to seek their approval. We did a prospecting project in northern BC. So we went in, we informed the First Nation, and we said we'd like to go into your territory exploring. We committed to them if we were found anything of interest, we would come back and ask for their support before we would go ahead and stake.
That's fantastic.
I want to set it up in a way that they will be able to participate so that they could learn from the project, bring their younger people involved in it, and I'm make the commitment to them if this moves forward towards a mining project that will be developed. I want to make sure they have equity in it.
So speaking of equity, obviously there's many ways that as an industry we can foster further Indigenous participation. I know that you're involved in one project in particular that I find really interesting, the Salmon Gold Project. My understanding is it literally produces gold while restoring salmon habitats. It's pretty incredible.
The idea of Salmon Gold is to say, in your mining activities, is it possible to do it in a way that when you leave the project is better than when you started? We wanted to make sure that the indigenous fish populations and the salmon runs, in fact, were the primary objective. In the early 1900s through mid 1900s, they had these big dredges up in that area, and they used mercury. And so they would go into these creek systems and they would dredge it all out and take the gold and then they would leave. But the mercury, a lot of that mercury leached into the system. So what we did is we remined some of these old areas. We created a channel for the water to flow, and then we created ponds, and so that you could have a place where the fish can go that's calm, like a lake type setting. And it's amazing what nature will do if you give it half a chance. In fact, what started to happen is within 24 hours of us doing this project, we saw the grayling population come into the water. We're thinking of it in the context of the ecosystem and all the animals, the birds, the fish, the wildlife that actually utilize the area is restored in a way that it's natural to them.
And so by going above and beyond in that way, there are some interesting elements of your supply chain downstream, right?
Yeah, that's correct. A lot of the end users like Apple, Tiffany, they would like to be able to track the gold to make sure that they can have absolute confidence it came from the project. Apple came up, it became an important story in how they're looking at procurement.
That's pretty incredible. Alan, I know you're really passionate about Aboriginal youth empowerment and leadership from some of our previous conversations. In the context of Indigenous participation in the mining industry, what future do you dream of for the next generation?
Well, my colleagues and I, we looked at it, we say, what is happening in the sector today that needs to change? We need our youth to get geology degrees. We need them to sit on the board of directors for exploration companies, for mining companies. We need them to understand the industry from start to finish. We should understand the micro and macroeconomics associated with mining. I think that we should become the leaders in strategic metals. See, because we want to help solve some of the climate change problems. And I think we need to own the mines, and I think our communities have to benefit from it, not just the leadership, but our communities.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think that's a really good point. What do you think mining is still getting wrong? And what advice would you give, say, a non Indigenous mining executive who is well intentioned about how to get it right?
When I've talked with mining companies, a lot of them would say that they're concerned about putting in pre-prior informed consent into their agreements. But to me, that's the ultimate kind of requirement because it it then clearly is built on trust and respect for each other. And I think some of the corporations are getting it. We're starting to see First Nations show up on boards of directors now. So I think we're moving in the right direction. Are we there yet? No, we're not there yet. Where we see less implementation of these ideas is really at the exploration stage. The junior companies, they take great pains to say that if you tell people where you're going to explore, then you're inviting competition to come in ahead of you or to compete with you. And I just don't buy that anymore.
Absolutely.
I think the juniors are going to have to come around to the idea that, hey, we're not bad people. We could be very helpful for your project if it's supported.
So it sounds like that's actually a really big opportunity. And I actually wanted to ask you specifically, what are some of our greatest opportunities for change as an industry so we can more effectively reduce our social risk, claims, negative impacts, and genuinely support economic self-sufficiency, reconciliation, ecological stewardship?
Well, there's many opportunities working with First Nations people. We're seeing the investment community wants to see social responsible, environmentally sustainable kind of projects. We're seeing the end users like Apple, Tiffany, BMW, Tesla, ArcelorMittal say, hey, we want to buy responsibly mined product. And, they're reaching out now to Indigenous companies to say, we'd like to work with you guys.
Right. So what do you expect the biggest challenges are going to be in advancing Indigenous participation in mining?
Some of the biggest challenges is to build our capacity in our own communities. I talked earlier about getting more of our young people to get into post-secondary. The second challenge is for our governments to build capacity. So when you talk about shared decision-making, shared management, we have people on the ground that have those skill sets. On the other side, we need government to enter into agreements with us to recognize our title and rights. We need industry to understand that we have got authority if they impact on our values and principles that are non-negotiable. If you're going to damage a whole ecosystem, I can't support it.
So, Alan, what does the term indigenizing mining mean to you? Is it integrating environmental or cultural values into project design? Is it contributions to community development, local employment, local procurement, impact benefit agreements, equity stakes, something else, all of the above?
Well, I think it takes in all of the above, but it starts with this. It starts with recognition that we have inherent right to self-government. And then from that, all the stuff you talk about falls into that larger idea of indigenizing mining. We need to be more and more vigilant about what are the impacts to the wildlife. You see, because we still harvest our food on the land, like our moose populations and our caribou, our sheep, and we still eat the salmon that come up the river. And so that's our food security.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So when you think about the future of the mining industry, what are you most afraid of and what are you most excited about?
I'm not afraid of it, but I want to see more controls. I would like our people to have more authority. And with that comes responsibility. I think that also gives me excitement because it means that we have to evolve as a government, that we have to evolve as decision makers, that we have to encourage our entrepreneurs to get involved in business. And so it's all about building capacity.
That's great. There's a question that I ask everyone on the show. The name of the show is Prospecting Purpose. What does purpose mean to you, Alan, in the context of the future of the mining industry?
Well, it sounds corny, but it's called being responsible. It takes people like yourself to have the vision and the initiative to be interested enough to invite people like me into a conversation that potentially changes this whole mining sector. I commend you on that, and I can say thank you for reaching out to me and inviting me to participate. Madu, as we say. Thank you.
I appreciate that so much, Alan. I'm so thankful for your time today. And thank you so much for sharing your thoughts, your opinions, your experiences. And if you change even one person's opinion of mining or teach even one person in the audience something they didn't know before, then I think our time today was worth it. Well, that's all for today's episode. This is Liz Friel on Prospecting Purpose. Thank you for joining us, and thank you so much, Alan, for being my co-host today. If you want to learn more, check out the show notes for links on all that we covered today. See you next time.